Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're looking at NIO. NIO chief says the EU probe of Chinese electric cars does not make sense. Chinese electric car maker NIO will continue to push ahead with its plan, with its expansion throughout the European region, as its chief executive criticized an EU investigation of Chinese EV imports from China, saying it does not make sense. William Li, who is often referred to as China's Elon Musk, said the company would consider partnering with local manufacturers to build a factory in Europe. The founder and CEO had a short statement, and I quote, "We're from China, but we're also a global company," Li said. This was after NIO's opened its first showroom in Amsterdam. "We're against such approach where the tariffs are used to stop the flow and trades of electric vehicles." The CEO went on to say, and I quote, "I think that the many accusations of the European Commission does not make sense," he added. When asked whether the strategy in Europe would change if Brussels imposed higher tariffs, he said the company would make the most reasonable business decision. Brussels is investigating whether Chinese car makers use subsidies to cut the price of their electric vehicles in a probe that is widely expected to lead to higher tariffs. The US last week announced a quadrupling of tariffs on electric vehicles from China to 100%, aimed at preventing groups such as BYD and NIO from building market shares in the US. On the investigation in Europe, Li said that subsidies in China are also available to foreign car makers, describing the country as the most open market worldwide. This is a very interesting point that the CEO is stating. I've also said something very similar. Tesla is very much welcome in China. In fact, Tesla has built a factory in China. However, there seems to be a huge support against any Chinese companies, especially electric companies, building a factory in Europe or the US, doing well, selling vehicles in Europe or the US. It is very bizarre. It is a very interesting thing that's happening right now, with the trade war that's going on. It's not a war, it's just trade politics. That's what it is. I think it's very interesting that the CEO of NIO stated very clearly that in China, there's also subsidies available to foreign car makers, describing the country as the most open market. Yes, this is true. The Chinese have invited Tesla to build a factory and do very well in China. China has been a very successful market to Tesla. So why should China open doors to Tesla, welcome doors, yet there's not the same friendliness with EV companies in Europe and in America? Because for a long time, this is how business works. This has always been how business has worked. China has always been the world's manufacturing hub. In fact, the world can't really survive without Chinese imported goods. I don't see this tariff being applied to iPhones made in China. In fact, I don't see this tariff being applied to any Apple products that are made in China, or any European or US companies that make products in China. I don't see this tariff being added to those companies. So why is it only Chinese companies that are being targeted? Okay, you're saying that they're getting subsidies. Why shouldn't they get subsidies from China? They want to be successful. The Chinese government want them to be successful. There goes, supply them with subsidies to make them more successful. I don't understand the misconstruction, if I'm being completely honest, because for a very long time, governments have funded companies to make them multi-billion-dollar companies, hugely successful. In fact, if you look at some of the biggest companies you find worldwide, they've been funded by government subsidies, by, government incentives. This is not abnormal in any way. There's many automotive companies that have taken out loans from Europe or from the US. This is a very normal procedure. So why is it suddenly all against China? China is very competitive. Very, very competitive. And what it mostly seems like is that Europe and the US cannot keep up with China's competitiveness. And if I'm being completely honest, that's not China's fault. This is the way the world works. These rules were always set decades ago. This is well known. This is how you do business. And the Chinese have spent decades adapting to this model. And now that they've perfected it and they know how to do it very well, now suddenly you want to impose tariffs on them? Okay, if you're going to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, impose tariffs on all Chinese goods, on all products manufactured in China. Impose tariffs. there's really no reason to impose tariffs except for the fact that competition is heating up. Like I said, China is going at this really aggressively, but rightfully so. Have you seen China? You see, this is China's pollution problem. And the world didn't really care that China was living like this. The world did not care until European states, US states started being affected as well, until it was very obvious that it was inevitable to affect the entire world. Only then there was a huge emphasis on, okay, we all need to work together to make the world a cleaner environment. And now that the Chinese have decided, okay, that's a great idea, let's do it. Now you're going to tell the Chinese, we don't want your cars here. We don't want your Chinese cars in Europe or in America. We don't want you to help us clean up our air. Stay in China. That's basically what you're saying. And European automakers are selling cars in China. American automakers are selling cars in China, including Tesla, Audi from Europe, Mercedes, Ferrari, the list goes on. And you don't want China to sell cars in Europe and America? Excuse me? So this is more like trade politics. It's really just trade politics. They call it a trade war. It's not a trade war. It's trade politics. And both things have coincided and happened for decades. There's nothing new. The only difference is China is doing incredibly well with electric vehicles expansion and innovation. And the rest of the world wants to slow that down. Not the entire world. I haven't seen any African countries imposing huge amount of tariffs on Chinese automakers. I haven't seen Asian countries doing that either. It's mostly European countries and American countries. But often those are some of the best markets to sell the vehicles at higher returns. So those are the markets that China is actually targeting. And rightfully so, because those markets, the European market, the American market, they want cheaper EVs. The biggest complaint about Tesla is that the cars are too goddamn expensive. They want cheaper EVs. China has cheaper EVs. In fact, China has very much incredibly cheaper EVs. And this is scary for Europe and for America, because if China does well in those countries, they will build a name for themselves. And then American brands, European brands, they won't be as successful. But you have to understand, competition. China is allowing you to go to China and build a factory. Tesla did it. Any other European companies can go to China and build an EV factory and build EVs and sell them. China's not stopping you. They want you to do it. They want innovation. They want to innovate. They want to thrive. They want to be a healthy society and not be hindered by pollution that is terrible for people, pollution that is terrible for kids. China has to do what they're doing. You don't see this in Europe and you don't see this in America. When's the last time you seen kids and families with face masks on? Not because of COVID, because of pollution. You don't see this in Europe and you don't see it in China. So Europeans and the Americans, they really lack the understanding that this is critical for China. They have to do this. They have to innovate. They have to do incredibly well. So providing subsidies to these EV companies is the only way China can survive. Is the only way they can better their society. They can't live like this. And in order for these companies to survive, they have to do well worldwide, not just in China. As great as China is also limited. The rest of the world is a also big market. It's this big market. There's money to be made out there. So I don't think everyone is thinking like this, because not everyone is in the same position as China. So not everyone is thinking like China is thinking. So I'd have to say I agree with William Lee. It doesn't really make full sense. But, if Europe had this problem with pollution and America did as well, they would probably allow those Chinese EVs without any tariffs at all. So it's the way how the world works, really. Now, NIO is building a reputation as a premium brand, as we know. And I've been in a NIO ET5, and that's just an ET5. That's an introduction to NIO vehicles. That's an intermediary NIO vehicle. And even that thing was incredibly luxurious and premium. And I really loved the experience. I never drove it. I sat in it at a Goodwood festival. It was a great experience. Now, the CEO of NIO, he said that the company also wants to introduce lower price models in Europe. Of course they do, because NIO is working on a new brand that's called Firefly. They recently released their latest brand, Onvu. Now, Onvu is mostly for the Chinese market. NIO's creating new companies for the Chinese market. So if you think that the Chinese market already has too much competition, apparently not. NIO's like, actually, there's still a lot of market out there to acquire. But they want the European market as well. They want the American market as well. They want a share of it. All companies do. But Europe and America is in a position where they're reluctant for change. That's normal for human beings. We often are reluctant to change, scared of change, because we don't know what change might bring. We don't know. So they're a little bit afraid. Now, in Europe, establishing a manufacturing facility will be a natural result. For us, the baseline is 100,000 units a year, he said. That's a CEO statement. They want to build a factory in Europe, and they want to be building up to 100,000 vehicles a year. Now, that's incredible. And I'm glad he's thinking like this, because that should help to solve this tariff problem, if I'm being completely honest. Because if you're building your cars on the European region, then I don't see any reason why there should be any tariffs. If you're building cars in America, I don't see any reasons why there should be tariff. In fact, if anything, that's basically saying the Americans you're supplying jobs to, the Europeans you're supplying jobs to, now you have to pay the government an extra tariff, all because you're a Chinese company. That's called discrimination. That's called discrimination. Liam Lee also said, we're very confident, although we know Europe, in that we do have a long way to go. Yeah, they do have a long way to go in Europe and US. And it's not going to be an easy road, but they seem quite determined, and this is good. Now, earlier this month, rival BYD said it wanted to take a leading position in Europe before the end of the decade, promising huge investment in the region. Despite its expansion plan, NIO shares are down 47% this year. Now, I'm not complaining. To be honest, I enjoy the NIO stock being this cheap because I think this company is incredibly undervalued and underrated. And I think it's only a matter of time before this company really does incredible. And I think if they continue with their plan of perhaps building factories in Europe, I think that would be even more beneficial. In fact, with the plans of BYD, if I think BYD is planning to build factories in Europe as well, I think that would indeed be very beneficial. Tesla's built factories in Berlin, in Germany, and it's been incredibly successful for Tesla to expand worldwide. They're currently working on a factory in Mexico. So you can clearly see, if Tesla wants to go global, why shouldn't other EV companies be allowed to do the same thing? However, it's being made very difficult for these companies to do this well in other regions. And this has just added pressure to slow these companies down. But if I'm being completely honest, they're not going to slow down. If anything, they're going to become more aggressive. BYD, NIO, other Chinese electric vehicle companies, they're going to go more aggressive with their expansion plans. I always wondered why companies like Li Auto, they don't deliver outside of China. I'm starting to get a better understanding of why it's so difficult for Chinese companies to expand out of China. And this is compounded by the fact that as much as the world relies on China for being the manufacturing hub to the entire world, the world still doesn't appreciate Chinese manufacturing and Chinese products. Sadly, that is true. But you see this very real iPhone that I bought directly from Apple? I was built in China, designed in California, built in China. Yeah, they might sometimes even say it was assembled in California, but it was built in China. Assembled and built are two different things, because assembled simply means the phone was completed in a certain region, which simply means that the majority of the phone was probably built in China, but once it's been brought to the US, they finally attached a screen. That's assembled. These little fancy words, they're not fooling anyone. William Lee also said, which is perhaps one of my favorite parts, and I quote, "We do have sufficient funds to sustain our continuous development." This is great. And they do have a huge amount of fund. Cash on hand, they're not short in that factor. He added a global slowdown in sales of electric vehicles was likely to do with temporary and said hybrid vehicles, which have been more in demand, were a transition product. Yes, hybrid vehicles have gotten incredibly popular in recent years for very obvious reasons, because they give you the best of both worlds. And there's been a lot of companies who have been investing in hybrid vehicle technology. So it is no surprise to see hybrid vehicle technology doing this well with hybrid vehicle sales. This is a look at the the amount of cash NIO has on hand. On Qualtrim is stating that it's 6.8 billion in cash, 1.5 in debt, and 1.6 in capital lease. Surprisingly, the debt of the company is not all that bad, which is really good to see. But this is just an estimate amount. It could actually be a lot more than that, if I'm being completely honest. Now, in other news for NIO reached 200,000 ES6 deliveries. This is the ES6 SUV, if I'm not mistaken. NIO actually posted a quick statement on Twitter to celebrate this huge accomplishment, the NIO ES6 and the NIO EL6. Its EU equivalent has just delivered the 200,000 vehicle in its second generation. This model has disrupted the dominance of traditional premium brands in mid-size SUV categories in many key markets and is NIO's single best-selling models. What a remarkable feat for NIO. Seriously, what a remarkable feat for NIO and a very successful vehicle for the brand. And hopefully they continue along this trajectory. Hopefully there becomes more positivity continuously out of the NIO brand. That's what we're hoping for. Also, huge congratulations to NIO on opening up the NIO Amsterdam store, the NIO house in Amsterdam. Their first in Amsterdam, I believe. Really, really good stuff by the NIO company. This, ladies and gents, is not a company or brand that intends on slowing down anytime soon, and I absolutely love that. I mean, just look at this thing. Look at the ET7, you know, a true competitor to the Mercedes S-Class or the BMW 5 Series or the Audi. Just look at this thing. Serious competition. Serious competition from NIO, and that's what I like about this brand. It's not afraid of what's out there, you know. It's not afraid to punch above his weight, and really and truly it's created something of its own identity, something that is truly magnificent. NIO vehicles really are beautiful. Now, the interesting part is that, you know, this story does continue. Like I said, it's trade politics. Apparently, China is now threatening to retaliate with a tariff of up to 25% on imports. Despite this, NIO is standing by its growth plans in Europe. Lee confirms to reporters this week that NIO will continue its EU expansion plans amidst growing tensions. The expansion comes despite European Commission launching an investigation. Of course, we know this, but the part where China could retaliate with a tariff of their own. Now you see how this could slowly build into something that is just too chaotic. The biggest loser in this situation will be the consumers, us. Vehicles being imported will be more expensive. Vehicles being exported for other people around the world will be more expensive. This doesn't benefit us. And that added expense, I don't think it's going to the companies. I think that's going to the governments because it's called a tariff. What the heck is going on? It's crazy. It's too crazy, in fact. NIO added that electric vehicles are very important for positive development of the environment. They should never be used as political targets. I agree. I showed you those images of why NIO is such a prominent force of the Chinese EV giants. Why it's essential that China provides subsidies to these brands as much as possible, because this is how China does better. China is in a position where they can't afford to not innovate with EV technology. They have to survive. No one else is in this situation that China's found themselves in. Now, apparently, NIO only sold 2,404 vehicles in Europe last year, according to Dataforce. What NIO's hoping to do is to sell over 100,000 vehicles in Europe annually. Then they're looking to build a European plant. Now, I'm quite positive that NIO can sell over 100,000 vehicles throughout the European countries on an annual basis. I'm quite confident in that. But with the added tariffs, it really does make things more complicated. If it wasn't for those tariffs, this could be an easy accomplishment. But to even take it further, NIO will only consider building this plant if they can sell around 100,000 vehicles. But the potential is there. But if they take too long to build this plant, it will only then perpetuate the problem of tariffs. The sooner NIO can build an EV manufacturing plant in Europe and provide jobs to Europeans, the sooner they can avoid this tariff problem. They can probably take the European Commission to court over this tariff problem if NIO builds a European factory. In fact, they don't need to build a European factory. They can probably buy one that's already built and just reconfigure it. But ideally, I can understand why they want to build a factory. But building a factory in Europe, 5, 8, 10 years is going to take a while. At the moment, it seems that NIO's plan is to export their vehicle from China in Europe and in America. But I think the sooner they build some more factories worldwide, I think the more benefits that will add to them long term. But they're probably very concerned about making this investment if it's not worthwhile. However, thinking long term, it absolutely will be worthwhile. This tariff discussion, tariff political situation that's going on, in all fairness, this problem will probably resolve itself in a matter of time. It's hard to say how long it will take, but I still think NIO, BYD, these brands they will move a lot quicker if they do what Tesla do and build these factories as soon as they can in other continents. Because this tariff on EVs, it's often on the imported EVs. If the EVs are built in Europe, they're not imported. They're built there. If they're built in the US, again, they're not imported. They're built there. Very different case scenario. Now, EV sales in Netherlands tripled last year, reaching 128,000 compared to 43,000 sold in 2019, according to Bojov. That's about 30% of new vehicle sales. The new space for NIO in Amsterdam, apparently where 10,000 people pass daily. This could spearhead NIO's expansion. This will help to promote the brand on a daily basis, constantly. People will be curious to go into the stores, sit in the vehicles. And once they sit in these vehicles, if they have the same reaction that I did, which was, wow, this thing is surprisingly very comfortable, very premium and luxurious, even the ET5. If they have that same reaction, yeah, I have no doubt NIO will do incredibly well. And they will continue to raise this awareness that their vehicles, they can be just as good as European electric vehicles, if not better. Now, here's another key development. The NIO company, the EV makers ES8, ET7, EL7, ET5, ET5T, and EL6 models have entered into the European market. The Chinese-based car maker built 43 battery swap stations and 46 charging stations connected to more than 500,000 third-party chargers in Europe. Understand something as well. NIO is also offering a very different service compared to other electric makers. They've built over 43 battery swap stations in Europe, and they're operating these, and they plan to expand with these, and they plan to sell more vehicles in this region so that people will be able to use these charging stations, these swapping stations. I'm telling you, if it wasn't for all these barriers against NIO and BYD, they would be moving a lot quicker, but nevertheless, they're not allowing that to stop them. And that's a very important part of this conversation. They're not allowing these artificial conversations to slow them down. They are still full steam ahead on this European region, American region expansion. Well, European region they're starting with, but America, that's the big apple. That's the ultimate destination, if I will say. And they're slowly getting there. So this is a report on that. Chinese automaker BYD looking for Mexico plant location. They want to build a manufacturing facility in Mexico. And that's perhaps one of the smartest ideas BYD could do right now. And I think NIO should follow them and build a factory in Mexico as well. That would give them a factory on the American continent. It'd be South America, I believe. It's not North America, but that's still good. That's still closer to the US, as close as you can get to the US. The next task is to build a factory in the US, as much as the US would hate that. But it's the ultimate goal. Tesla has factories in China, and I will continue to reiterate this. Tesla has factory in China. It's time BYD, NIO, they build their factories in the US, in Europe as well. The BYD company expects to choose a location for the plant, which is set to have a production capacity of 150,000 vehicles annually by the year's end, Lee said. You know, that is very, very interesting, by the year's end. Because for peak production, I don't think 150 is their peak production estimate. I think they intend to optimize these factories for a lot more production capacity. If I'm being completely honest, that would be a long-term plan for these Chinese EV manufacturers such as BYD and NIO. And I'm bullish on both companies. The amazing thing also is that Mexico is slowly becoming its own little investment and manufacturing hub. A lot of companies who are moving out of China, they're actually moving to Mexico with their manufacturing plans. Apple is looking to move to India with its manufacturing plans. I could see Apple considering Mexico as well. But because Mexico is so close to home, Apple would like to avoid that criticism, which is why I think they have strongly considered India. But the thing about China is that because the Chinese are so efficient in manufacturing everything, it's really hard to give that up because they have everything you need at a moment's notice. And when you're in the new industry of Mexico, you often don't have everything at a moment's notice. You don't have everything just waiting. There's a reason why Germany loves to build vehicles because they have an ecosystem that thrives on this. You have to have an ecosystem supply it. Cars have millions. Cars have cars have hundreds of moving parts and thousands of parts. And the expertise it takes to do this, you have to have an investment hub. So in Germany, you have the automaker's version of Silicon Valley. In China, the entire country is Silicon Valley. And in Mexico now, there's becoming this small manufacturing hub of its own Silicon Valley. Now, I'm going to end the conversation here. I think I've made my point multiple times. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more. Leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you in our next video. Peace.